Let us invite, in fact, I think you're going to ask me something, Valerie, first, then I'm going to ask you something, and then we're going to ask, is that good?
It is, but I wonder whether we give colleagues, as you suggested earlier, just a few minutes to buzz with a neighbour, to process your own thoughts. So while we get our throats, as it were, in gear, why don't you turn to a neighbour or find a neighbour and just surface what's been bubbling in your head. I'm assuming that we have got some roving mics, and we would like to hear your voices shortly. So we're on time. We've made up, I think, some of the deficit. 2 or 3 minutes with a neighbour, what resonated, what challenged you, anything you disagreed with, any concerns you'd like to put into the room very shortly. So go. Are there roving mics? Are there? Yeah, there's one. You might want to come back into the body of the hall. But just to kick us off, we decided that we'd ask each other some challenging questions to put each other on the spot, really. So, Bill, I think you were going to start.
Valerie, you're adept at working with and within systems to change them. What one low-cost thing can you think that we might do over the next 5 years to really bring the kind of things?
Who's the we?
Would you like to decide who the we is?
Okay. You may think this is weird, but I do believe, and this is going to be at the heart of my question to you, that what we're fundamentally engaged in now is trying to shift a system. It's not just creating pockets of good work. It's not just doing wonderful collaborative work. It is about shifting the system so it's not continuously an uphill struggle of opposition. And I've come to believe that shifting the system is going to be predicated in the first instance by a different kind of narrative about what education is, which sounds very kind of highfalutin, but in all the conversations that we have, and this is low cost, all right, in all the ways in which we talk in the staff room, in the playground, to kids themselves, to people who come to visit us as Ofsted inspectors, others, we start to talk about success in a different way. We start to talk about our purposes in a different way. And we recenter the whole narrative, the whole story about what education is for at the heart of the story. Now, that conversation, that dialogue, that narrative, in my view, underpins so much. And it sounds as though it's kind of a bit irrelevant, and we want to get into the hard stuff of whether we're doing GCSEs or not. But those things flow from deep understandings of the nature of our enterprise, if you like. And if I'm right, what has seized policymakers' kind of common sense imagination is that that's all about human capital theory. They know this, but they also know that they're on short electoral timeframes, that their existence in public life depends upon being re-elected, and that they must talk common sense speak. So you will get some of the stuff about the arts from the Department of Culture, but you will not hear that, really, from the Department for Education, for the reasons I've set out. Let me put it to you. What do you think is the key to system shift?
I think there are some things that are happening, actually, about rethinking one-word judgments in terms of Ofsted, and a slightly lighter tone around what schools are required to teach. But the thing that I feel passionate about is that we've completely misunderstood the word standard and its plural, standards. It's a strange word to be using, and politicians are scared of it, because if it appears to be slipping through your hands and going down in some way, then that's not good news. And I think that we need to rehabilitate that. And I think that one of the ways that we discovered at Rethinking Assessment that we can do this is to call out a bigger audience response. And when you talk to parents, when you talk to employers, when you talk to young people themselves and the teaching profession, you get a very different view about what counts and what matters. So I think, I know you and I agree about this, Valerie, there's nothing short of an ongoing discussion about what the point of school is. And until we've had that, we can do some tinkering. And I'm really thrilled at some of the quite major tinkering that I think will happen in this first Labour term, in this government.
We shall see.
We shall see.
Over to you. it can be a question, it can be a challenge, it can be an observation, it can be a blurt, whatever you like. It's hard to see you, but please raise a hand if you'd like to have a microphone. Right down here at the beginning. Please raise your hand so I can send a mic to you in due course as well while we're waiting. Somebody else to come. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Yep, you're on.
I'm on. Thanks for coming down here, and also thanks for to Andy and everyone for putting this on, and particularly bringing it to New Brighton, because these sort of conferences often happen in big cities, and I think it is important. There's a lot more towns than there are cities, and to bring it to somewhere like New Brighton is really appreciated. My sort of question/observation is, if you look at the distribution of funding for education across, say, colleges, schools, and then the private sort of providers, do you think that is sort of sustainable in the way that it is? I'll give you a quick example. My sister is a teacher, and when she moved to Newcastle, she was in a particularly deprived area, where about 70% of the kids in the primary school were on watch lists and things like that. And she rang me up on the first day and was in tears and said she was teaching reception class. She didn't even have a classroom. She had part of the assembly hall, which was sort of sectioned off. And she didn't have one jigsaw or one that was complete, one set of pens or anything. And at the same time, Morrison's were putting 30,000 staff through a 3-month apprenticeship, which, as we all know, isn't worth the paper it's written on. When they were just cramming them through, basically just tick boxes and drawing about £4,500 for each one. And I look at, schools and the money they get as opposed to private providers, and I ran an education provider, company for 30 years. Most of it wasn't funded; it was just normal commercial stuff. But I think that schools are massively underinvested, and that also a lot of it is not about teaching now; it's about crowd control for 40 minutes. And I just think there's got to be a real rethink about the actual funding of schools, and I think a hell of a lot should be put in, more should be put in at primary and secondary level than after that. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
I do, thank you. You just sort of lit my blue touch paper, retire. I'll try not to hog this discussion. I feel passionately about this. I agree with you in every respect, except that we need to think about the system as a totality and not just the position of schools. Think about schools and further education and colleges and the universities. Everything that the state invests in its education system. Start with schools, but you do need to see the entire package. And I go again to the kind of, if you like, the underpinning narrative that I tried to call out earlier. If you compare the level of funding within the universities compared to that which goes into the colleges, and yet the proportion of the populations that they're supposed to support, it's completely inequitable. Tim Brighouse, God bless his soul, always used to say, look at the funding that goes into early years compared to that which goes into secondary. Secondary teachers might not like this, but or goes into universities. It's completely inverted. We should be ploughing money into the early years and giving the best start possible for every kid and then reaping the benefits of that. Politicians will not go near the funding base at the moment. It's too hot, it's too difficult. Put it in the too difficult box. But it is a fundamentally inequitable system. Bill, did you want to comment?
No, agree.
Okay. Note that, to put that down in history. Okay, up the top there's 2 hands waving about. I think I saw someone over here as well. Thank you.
I think teaching is the greatest profession, and I think we're all here because of that. But we've got a teacher attraction crisis, we've got a teacher retention crisis. What are we going to do to solve that issue? Because for me, the reason I came into teaching 25 years ago was because of that, ambition for creativity within the arts.
Thank you, Bill.
I completely agree with you. One of the most heartwarming findings from an event in Birmingham where all of the collaboratives came together to celebrate their work was exactly that reminder that this initiative had enabled many of those teachers to recover exactly that feeling of joy that they'd had several years ago. And I think it won't solve the problems of the world, it won't solve the resourcing issues, but it will shift the way that many teachers experience life in schools. And I think the Lisa Nandy statement about the breadth too, I think that will help.
It's about the quality of the experience of teaching, isn't it? Much more than, I mean, of course salaries matter, of course cost of living makes that critical, but the question is, what's the quality of the experience day to day, and the sense of your identity within it, I suspect. There's one at the back as well. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things you said before was the difficulty in moving things forward with the government, the politicians sort of being on a 5-year timescale. Do you think that it's actually businesses that are going to be able to drive this forward? I'm thinking sort of anecdotally that schools were designed in the Victorian times for factory workers so that there was some degree of education going forward. So the question is, do you think it's businesses now that can be the driver? Because I'm hearing that things like the recruiting specifically for neurodiversity, because those are the people that think outside the box. So is it business that's going to drive this?
Thank you. I published a paper recently about the new politics of educational change and why it is that politicians are kind of trapped in the old narrative with their short electoral timeframes and the difficulties that creates. But I try to draw an analogy between the struggle that we face in education in shifting a system and climate change, and looked at the work of activists in climate change. And what I learned by thinking about the Greta Thunbergs of this world and the way they're trying to pursue that even more profound and difficult shift of a completely changed relationship to energy and to the environment, is that they made unlikely alliances. And that one of the key things they're doing at the moment is joining with business and saying, if you think about the costs to business of working dirty as opposed to going green, actually there's a huge alliance to be made, and the voices of business are becoming more, leaving aside the petrochemical industry, obviously, although they themselves are trying to talk the green talk. That kind of alliance with business is going to be absolutely fundamental. So I think you're spot on, that businesses increasingly, I think, need to find their voice about what we need, not just for their own bottom line and the profit margin, but also what we need as communities. And I think increasingly businesses are starting to see themselves as interested in the triple bottom line, not just people and profits, but also the planet, and bringing that perspective to bear on what they need and we all need as emergent from our education systems. So the more that businesses get stuck into the dialogue, the better, in my view.
Yeah, totally agree. But I think businesses are not homogeneous, and I think sometimes we lump them all together. In the same way I was arguing that creativity is an abstract, many of the forward-looking larger businesses are espousing exactly the kind of values-driven, strength-based, neurodiverse, creative, collaborative, communicative world that we're talking about. In the middle, there are a lot of businesses under threat at the moment, just trying to get their heads around the AI revolution, where they may be less immediately progressively interested in this. At the small business level, micro business level, it's a no-brainer, because that's how they survive in so many different cases. I think there's one new body that we've not mentioned, and that's Skills England. I think that could be part of a dialogue that makes sure we get both the more values-driven dispositions and the kind of wider skills that the creativity collaboratives have been focusing on, how we get those stage centre. So yes, we absolutely need to listen more to business, but I think we need to listen to parents as well. And I think they've been a missing part, not in the creativity collaboratives, but I think we've not yet taken the argument fully to parents and carers.
Thank you. Right, where else have we got? Two more down here. Nobody on that side of the room? Oh, and sorry, I didn't see you. Go, yeah.
Hello. What do you think the role of arts and cultural organisations is in supporting this change, particularly given the financial crisis that a lot of those organisations are in?
Mm-hmm. Bill?
Central. I can't think of any school doing this kind of work that doesn't have a range of arts, cultural, and indeed scientific and other partners. I just think it's the message of this conference because it's true. So I think they're absolutely significant. And I think sometimes in schools there's a mindset issue and it's partly because there are so many flipping forms that have to be filled in and risk assessments that have to be done and appropriate safeguarding issues. But I absolutely think that they're critical. I'm not going to comment on the funding issue, except that I want you to have a lot of money.
That should do it. There was another one up there. Oh no, we're coming down here. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I did have a question, but I've just been triggered by the last one as well, so now I've got a problem. The first one was, briefly, I am a theatre director. I ran a TIE company for many years, and I was a school governor for 25 years, but I left school at 15 and never went to further education. So I was a kind of interested adjutant observer of the system for a long time. The thing that seems to be missing from the debate, I don't think it's missing from thinking, we just haven't talked about it maybe, is you can't fix an airplane that's in the air. I mean, I write training courses for Airbus, and there's no lay-by at 35,000 feet. So we have to be building a new plane, in my opinion. And I'm sure that new plane is the curriculum and the training that we give teachers before they become teachers. And so I would kind of like maybe your thoughts about what we can do with teacher training to create creative-minded, self-advocating, optimistic, and it's a mindset, creativity, and I think we don't instill it. We force our teachers to be switchboards rather than engines, in a way. That's a worry for me.
Bill, I'll hand you the teacher training piece. I do want to come back to, I think it's a poor analogy, really. I must stop using it, the business about changing the plane while we're flying it. It's kind of unhelpful. But I think in the education environment, in the context, what we are seeing is the evolution of completely new models of schooling around the world, which demonstrate what this can look like. And it doesn't necessarily have to be incredibly many teachers would say, oh yeah, well give me the resources, give me a greenfield site and I can do all of this. But I think about this country, I think about models, for example, like of XP School. If you don't know XP School in Doncaster, take a look at their website. Began as a free school, began as a greenfield site, but is now a regular state school, and what they are doing there in terms of creating a new model, even within the constraints of the assessment system which their kids are subject to, I think is quite remarkable. So, or I think of half a dozen examples around the world of new models of schooling which do privilege exactly as we've been talking about. One, the agency of learners. Two, their creativity and the creativity and agency of teachers. Three, a different approach to curriculum, which doesn't think it's a set thing in a box and that you can fix for the coming 10 years. The nature of pedagogy, which is relational, and so on and so forth. And these the creation of these kind of models which say, look, with ordinary kids in ordinary communities, this can be done. I think this is the way to think of how we might increasingly look to the forms of shift and evolutionary incremental change that might just get us somewhere. But how we train teachers, and by the way, one of the things that these schools find most difficult is to have the right teachers to teach in them. They end up training their own because the teacher training system is so inadequate for what they need in the new form of pedagogy that this entails. So Bill, what's your observations on the teacher training system right now?
I think it divides into two. So there's the initial teacher training, which is absent, completely absent. If you're involved in the training of primary school teachers or secondary teachers, you'll notice that creativity is completely absent. So that's a real challenge. And that has to be done from the centre. I think in terms of schools, we need to rethink the way we think about professional learning. Too often, we thought about it as an event. We used to call them Baker Days or an insect day. It can't be thought of in that way. It's an ongoing process. And it has some kind elements in it. It requires us to be able to share what we understand by creativity and give examples of how it can be embedded in every facet of a school's life. Then it needs to leave space for energetic practice and experimentation in probably an action research kind of way. It needs to be bounded by a community of interested and supportive and critically friendly others. And once you do that, we know from across the world things really shift. That's what we found, by the way, in some of the earlier PISA publications. We looked at system inhibitors and system persuaders. And schools that are the beneficiaries of that kind, and teachers, the beneficiaries of that kind of professional learning, thrive. And then I think the third bit of this is there's a special need for those who are in a leadership position, whether that's a school or system one, and that does require an opportunity to see best practice, to think, dreaded, rather hackneyed phrase, but really to think outside the box, and then to go and think, so how can I wrap my arms around it in my particular area? Because what works in New Brighton may partially work in the other Brighton on the south coast, but may actually be rather different. So understanding that is really important, and always with a spirit of appreciative inquiry. Never too much training is in the spirit of gap analysis. You're no good at that, we're going to make you better. That doesn't do it for teachers.
Persuaded by that? Thank you. Well, just before I bring you in, I'm conscious we kind of neglected the leadership piece in everything that we've said, and that, of course, is a huge domain. What is the kind of leadership that's needed to really facilitate and empower this work? Yes, thank you.
Firstly, thank you to both of you. We're working with about 50 schools in Sefton around an idea, which is really quite exciting, of a young person's social signature. And a young person's social signature is the mark they leave on other people's lives, their community, themselves, and the world around them. And if you think of it as a cross, it's about me, understanding who I am, we, a sense of belonging, them having a sense of purpose and meaning in my life, and us being part of something bigger. What would each of you do to help, as guardians of a new generation, every young person leaving primary school to create their own unique social signature?
Well, I'm stunned into silence. What an absolutely brilliant idea, and I love the metaphor, and I love the way in which I can see you starting to play that out. I'm going to take it first, unless you're ready.
You go for it. I think it's a great last question as well.
Well, yeah, probably is. Sorry for those of you who are waiting. It seems to me that introducing that as a concept explicitly in a young person's career, as it's their journey through schools, in itself is a hugely powerful thing. So that conveys the fact of identity, your signature, but also your impact on others. So introducing it as a concept that young people are thinking about this impact that they have. And then secondly, making space explicitly, as it were, for that as a project to be pursued throughout their journey. One which is mentored, one which is guided, perhaps by a named adult. It need not necessarily be a member of staff, but something which actually they take through with them and evolve in various ways that they might connect with the community, that they might look at the community's issues and problems, and I mean that in the community's broader sense as well. But I love the idea of making that an explicit thing, of a notion that this is part of what a young person is doing in their school, is creating that social signature in the world. Superb, thank you. Bill? I
love the idea too, and I think we've been in email exchange about this, and I took your idea to the Commono Foundation that I advise, and they similarly really like that, and I'm hoping that my friend and colleague Pat Waters might be in the audience and can chat to you. She is, she's waving me at the back there. Because it's so much the way we're trying to think about it's a turning the telescope the other way around, isn't it? And starting from the understanding of what students are being and becoming and knowing and able to do in the world. And for me, to answer your question, it's what we've been playing around with at Rethinking Assessment, that students think ahead to the most extraordinary multimedia URL that is going to be the social signature of their life. It's going to have different moments along the way. It's probably going to be portfolio-based, but they are on the bridge of their own learning, in the ship of their learning as they sail. They're not down in the engine room, and they're curating the different experiences they have. And I think that many of the creativity collaboratives are beginning to find this a helpful metaphor. Not your particular one, but I'm sure they will, having heard you now.
Yes, you're right to make the point that it is inextricably linked up now with our digital existence and the way in which we are fundamentally intertwined with the emerging technologies. Whether we like it or not, that is our future. Perhaps as cyborgs, but hopefully creative ones. Thank you all so much for listening to us, for participating. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you're stimulated by it. And we're looking forward to the workshops and to hearing about your work for the rest of the day. Thank you again. Thank you.